I am thrilled to introduce Brad Heath. Brad is an investigative reporter at Reuters. I was also fortunate enough to work with him at USA Today, where he was not only an investigative reporter, but then also an editor of, the Justice Beat when, sorry, um, during the Mueller investigation, and so has worked on a lot of really intense stuff. He also has done PACER trainings and other trainings for IRE, for NICAR, and for the Paul Millers. And so he is going to talk to you about how to use PACER, how to basically get information on kind of anybody. And so please join me in welcoming Brad Heath.
Good morning, and thanks for having me. I'm not accustomed to talking for long periods of time, so please pepper me with questions. I do kind of want to be responsive here to what you guys want to learn from this, because we're going to cover the waterfront, and there's a lot of waterfront. So just to start off, how many PACER users are there in this group? Okay. How many of you use it regularly, weekly? Okay. Enough. Okay. So you know what you're doing. Enough to be dangerous. Okay. So for those of you who don't know, PACER is not actually just one website. It's more than 90 websites duct taped together by the Administrative Office of the Courts that have the dockets of all the federal courts, except for the Supreme Court, going back to about 2000. It's totally searchable by name. It's, despite being ugly and looking like it was built in the mid-90s, which it kind of was, it's incredibly useful. There's a huge wealth of information on there. You can find all the information about basically any pending case in the federal courts, including bankruptcy courts. You can search it by name. You can go back a long way, and it's not just that you can see what the status of the case is and what was filed, but you can actually go and read all of the filings in the court, with a few exceptions. So you can get quite a lot of information this way relatively quickly. And especially if you ever has anybody looked at bankruptcy records in PACER ever? They are just astonishing. If you think there's a lot of stuff in the regular federal court records, bankruptcy court, you have to list all the people you owe money to and what you owe money for, and there's all these detailed plans. So you can really get in somebody's business in bankruptcy court. Nobody ever looks at them, but you have to wade through sometimes thousands and thousands of pages to find the interesting stuff, but it is all there and it's fascinating. And then occasionally in PACER too, because it is a court system or reflective of the court system, you just find this crazy stuff. So, this was a couple years ago, but I was poking around one day and found a case called "In the Matter of the Seizure of 1 or More Tons of United States Gold." You know that's going to be good. It was actually really good too. They found a bunch of Civil War era gold in a cave in West Virginia, I think, and there was this big fight about could the federal government get it back from whoever had discovered it, and how was it stolen? It was fantastic. Did it have anything to do with my work? No. Did it consume several hours of my morning? Yeah. So that's kind of PACER in a nutshell. It's also important to know what PACER is not. First and foremost, it is not free. So there have been attempts to make it free. There's been a court finding that it's overcharging users. As of yet, nothing has really happened with that, so we're still paying, I think, 10 cents per page to search this thing. I think most of you guys work for large enough news organizations where you could say this would be a bargain at twice the price. But if you are just kind of doing this on your own, there's a point, I've never been below this point, so I don't know what it is, where if you only do a few searches a month, they're not going to charge you. I think that's right. I've never come close to that. So, so you can actually go in and make moderate use for free, but some of the stuff you might want to do can add up really quickly in terms of getting you past, especially at 10 cents a page. It is also just the federal courts, which are this tiny little sliver at the top of the US court system, right? You don't have state courts, you don't have local courts, you don't have county courts. There are millions and millions and millions of other court cases that you might be interested in that will not be reflected in PACER. And it's something to be aware of. And then the other one is, I imagine you guys are going to largely search by name, right? You want to see the Trump case, the Michael Cohen case, the whatever it may be. You're going to search by the defendant or the plaintiff or something like that. But there's some real limitations in terms of PACER, of like you can't go search for words within a document. You know, shortly after the January 6th siege, whatever you want to call it, I got really interested in what is the Justice Department calling this thing, right? And I want to look at all the filings and see, like, are they describing it as an insurrection? Are they describing it as like terrorism? Like, what kind of words are they using in court? And in PACER, there was no way to just filter for words within filings or certain types of filings. You had to go find them all and read them all. And that, I mean, they proliferated really quickly. It was a lot of filings. So there are some third-party tools that get built on top of PACER that are also pretty helpful that we can talk about in a minute if you guys want. Everybody good so far? Nobody's lost? Okay. So this is my main starting point for using PACER. It is the National Party Case Locator, and it is the national index that tries to pull together all these 90-odd district court and appellate court websites. So this is the one-stop shopping. It's not perfect. It's not updated super fast. So if a case was filed this afternoon, it might take a little bit to filter up into here. And, well, let's just poke around with it, right? There we go. Okay. So this is the party case locator. And a lot of these searches are really stupid. So the stuff about like find a case advanced, it only works if you know the case number already, which you don't. So this is and find party is really stupid too, because it just does a national search, and like try finding the John Smith case in a national search. So find party advanced will give you lots of information about stuff you might want to search for. I think I've used him before. I forget if he's Steve or Steven in the filing, so we're just going to do STE and hope for the best. And then we can kind of filter here. Party role's a little tricky. You got to know what all these codes mean, but he's been in criminal court. So we could add stuff about like what region he's been in. What it's asking for is what court. So has he been in the courts of the Third Circuit, Pennsylvania, New Jersey? Has he been in the Second Circuit? Or you can go search individual district courts. In this case, like, let's just have them all. And you can also specify a date range, but who cares? And so here we go. 2 criminal cases against Stephen Bannon, 1 pending, 1 completed, because he was pardoned. And then from here, you can click on into the case number, which takes you into the whatever district court this happens to be. They all have their own website. The thing I look at the most is the docket report here, which sometimes is at the top, sometimes is in the middle. All the sites are different. They have some truly heinous colors on some of them. It's spectacular. I don't know who made the design choices. Click through to see everything, and you will get the complete docket of this criminal case, including, so here we have the defendant, we have his lawyers, a bunch of lawyers. We have everything he's charged with and the disposition, so what happened to it. We have the prosecution, a couple more lawyers. Let's see. What's cool about this prosecution is, oh no, this is the press interveners. House of Representatives, there are a lot of lawyers in this case. Here's the plaintiff. Sometimes, it looks like it's the case here, the lawyers who get assigned to the case put their direct phone number into their PACER registration, so every time they show up in a case, you end up with their phone number. I'm not saying they will return your phone calls or be happy that you've called them, but this will get you past the switchboard. And it works with lawyers for a lot of the private parties too. You also get their email addresses, their work addresses, whatever you need. You keep going down and you get a chronology of everything that's happened in this case from start to finish. So we can see step number 1, he's indicted, which is how things normally begin. And we go, there's a lot of action here. It ends with a transcript, and on any one of these things, there's a link. A notice would be boring. Find something that's not boring. So here's a filing by Steve Bannon. You click the link. You pay your money. You get your document. So it's great in this way, right? And the other thing PACER will do, you'll see a lot of, it used to be huge on Twitter, but you'll still see a lot of like new filing in the Steve Bannon case or whatever. PACER in some places, including Washington, D.C., will let you basically sign up for updates as if you were an attorney in the case. So when a new thing happens, you'll just get an email as soon as it's filed telling you it happened. Not every court will do that, but ours here will. And we have a lot of interesting cases to talk about. Did I lose anybody in the speed of this? Okay. This is all very straightforward. This is the most basic use you can possibly make of PACER. There are also a universe of things that are not PACER, but are built on top of it, that are also incredibly helpful tools if you're going to try this kind of like mining court records, just looking around, or trying more sophisticated searches. So the first one is a site called Court Listener, and they have a product called Recap. Recap is actually really cool. It's an extension you put in your Chrome browser, and you guys should all do it. So every time you pay for a court record, Recap gets a copy. And then you get this spiffy little link down here that says read it for free, because they have a copy. So this is really spiffy. And then they also take them and very quickly ingest them into this ginormous warehouse of legal information that you can search into. You can use it to get updates on cases. You can use it to find cases by parties. You can do some cool stuff that is not possible in, how do I make this work? That is not possible in PACER. Oh, stop. It's a new laptop. So here is the recap search. So there's lots of filters you can put on it. It is limited to just the stuff that people with the browser extension have looked at. But in high-profile cases, what you'll see is people with the browser extension look at everything and they do it right away. So within a minute of something being posted, you'll probably be able to find it here if a case is prominent enough. So here, this is actually what I used when I wanted to start looking at the January 6th cases and what words is the Justice Department using. So I could go in and say, capital insurrection. I didn't filter this very well, but here's a criminal case, and it's searching within the filing. So now I can do a full text search on all the stuff that has showed up in this scraped trove of PACER records. This is fabulous. This is, beyond looking for find me, words that DOJ is using. It could be find me, specific types of malpractice cases. Find me allegations of negligence by Border Patrol officers. Find me something about like a shooting and a Fourth Amendment violation that you won't, unless you know the name of the plaintiff or the defendant, you won't be able to just go and poke around in PACER for that. But here you can just take keywords and find, good examples of things that have been litigated in federal court. And I will tell you, for investigations, even sometimes that have nothing to do with the legal system, this is kind of a gold mine because, what's sometimes the hardest thing is to go find people who have been harmed by whatever the thing you're writing about is, right? Well, what do people who've been harmed do? They sue each other. So here you can go in and find, like, if you can think of the right words, who are the people suing each other about this thing that I'm writing about? And you don't have to know who they are to start with. You can just kind of, and it's not exhaustive, it's not everything, but it's an excellent starting point. So the other thing you can do with this is you can get alerts on cases that are not in like the District of Columbia. So there are fascinating cases that come up in Virginia, that come up in New Jersey, whatever you want, the Southern District of New York. You can go find that docket in here and get email alerts whenever something new comes in. You can also get yourself email alerts whenever a new case with a word like insurrection comes in. You know, as soon as a new document like that shows up, it'll send something to your email saying, okay. I think you have to install the browser extension to get more than a couple cases that you can follow, but it's all totally free. It would be worth a lot more than that. There are other services too. There's one called Scoop that the idea was it mines data feeds coming out of PACER. So, you know, it's just pouring through lists of new filings. So if you're looking for like Johnson & Johnson and want to keep up to date with them, it's going to know every time there's a new Johnson & Johnson case. It's going to know, I think it's got SEC filings and other stuff that's got these like regularly updated data feeds that go with it. I haven't used that one in a while. There's another one called PACER Pro that's just sort of designed to put a friendlier, nicer layer around PACER for you. You pay for it. You have to give it your PACER credentials. So and you can easily run up some bills on it because you can say, go check this case every hour. And then it's, you know, spending your money every hour. Just be careful what robots you put your credit card in, you know? So let me pause there before we sort of branch out of the federal courts and tell me like what else you guys might be thinking about, what you want to know from PACER that will be helpful to you in your jobs.
I had one very specific question, which is sometimes on Court Listener, the appellate court dockets don't always populate. And I was wondering why that was. Like 11th Circuit with Trump v. I think it was a special master case.
Yeah. I don't know the technical reason why that is, but I will tell you as someone who once built a thing that scrapes PACER, the appellate courts are different and they're more challenging. So, you know, whatever technology you deploy against the district courts to figure out what the dockets are does not work on the appellate courts because they've got like that pop-up sometimes and it's just kind of weird. So that's a blind spot of almost every service that I know some news organizations are trying to solve for, but I haven't seen a great solution to it yet. I mean, I'm asked pretty regularly, how do I follow appellate cases? And like,
I mean, you can create the alert
F5.
for it. It just doesn't populate the docket. So
yeah.
Right.
So you might on some of them see that there's something new, but there have been others where it's like a month will go by with a ton of litigation going on, and I don't get a single thing about it. And then I kind of look and say, wow, all that stuff's happened. So I don't know the answer to that. The other thing Court Listener does that I think is pretty cool is in appellate courts, it largely acquires the oral arguments. So when a case is argued, like in an appellate court, you get one hearing usually. And then most of them post the audio online and it'll go acquire all of those too. And those can be kind of illuminating if you know what you're listening for.
And so I just had a follow-up.
Yeah, sure.
And then if Court Listeners struggles with the appellate court circuit, then is there a PACER alert that you can create for the appellate court?
I haven't succeeded in one through like the basic PACER application.
Right.
Now, I don't play with the appellate courts nearly as much. What you can do, I think some of the really paid services, LexisNexis, Westlaw, those tend to be better at mining in there. So if you have access to those, you can set up alerts, and they're very good. I don't know that they're great at a new brief was filed. They're exceptional at an opinion was delivered.
I feel like usually I get to the docket. What is it called?
The docket report?
The docket report.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure which documents to click on specifically. Like, I don't think I'm aware enough with the legal flow of how things work to know like what would be worth clicking into and spending the money to look through. Like, I feel like I end up just saving a million documents, and I don't.
Well, how much do you care about the case you're looking at from a, is it the Trump documents special master case where everyone looks at every single document and like scrutinizes every, grammar choice all the way down? Or is it, this trade association is suing over the latest coal plan and I just kind of want to not miss how it comes out? There's different things you would read in different kinds of cases. So what kind of case are you looking at?
So last time this happened, it was someone brought me a tip about the Labor Department and the way that they'd handle the complaint against a union.
Okay.
And it was something where they had gone back and forth for almost a year before they brought it to me. And so I was almost just trying to verify what exactly they had submitted in court.
Yeah.
And I feel like in over my head in terms of what to click into.
Okay. So let's talk for a second about the two main types of cases you will see in PACER. And there are lots of others. There's civil cases. What you're talking about is a civil case, right? Nobody's going to prison. And in those, the first thing you want to read is the complaint, which is almost always one of the first three things on the docket. The complaint says, here's what you did, here's what I'm suing you about, here's what I want. It's got to be a short, plain statement of, what your grievance is. Then there'll be an answer to the complaint. That's usually pretty formulaic of, deny paragraph 11, admit paragraph 12. But it gives you the Labor Department denied that particular allegation. So then you're conversant in the facts. I would look in a civil case for like a motion to dismiss, or a motion for summary judgment, or a brief, something where the parties are going to lay out in a big picture way, here's what I want. Here's why I think I am entitled to win. And the government will come back and say, here's why you are entitled to lose. And then, you also definitely want judgments, who won, opinions on most things, or like memoranda from the court, something by the judge, right? It gets a little weird in civil cases because civil dockets can just get like thousands of entries long, especially with well-funded private litigants. And then you'll have, 50 filings over what kind of information can each side get access to in advance of the trial. And unless you really want to go into the weeds, those are usually not that good, but sometimes they're really good. There was a case over, it was like Devin Nunes's family farm, and Hearst magazines or something, and the discovery disputes were like, it wasn't that one. That was a different one. That was a state court. But this was, the discovery, there was just such bitter accusations of wrongdoing in these things, and like so many shenanigans by the various parties involved, that they were really interesting, and they kind of color the whole outcome of the case. But if you're not, for the most part, you don't need to do that. You can, maybe there's an opinion though that says, I am resolving this discovery dispute, or a motion for sanctions, or something. Like when you start to see that's why I paid attention to it, because I saw a motion for sanctions. And like sanctions is kind of, you're way out of bounds here when somebody starts asking for that. So then, but if you read those sorts of things, you can go back and then say, because they'll cross-reference. They'll say, like, as we said on February 5th in our whatever, you go back and you say, okay, what'd they file on February 5th if you want to follow up? So that would be my starting point. Criminal case is a little bit different. Criminal case usually starts with an indictment, a complaint, or an information. If it starts with an information, that almost always means the person's about to plead guilty. Complaints are the best because it usually means somebody did something, we got to arrest him like right now. So the special agent will have written up some kind of thing about here's what he did, here's what we saw. In criminal cases, so I look for those to see basically what somebody's accused of doing. Sometimes the indictments are 60 pages when the government wants to make a point and tell a story. Sometimes they're 4 when it's like, you are a felon, you had drugs, that's a crime. And they don't even, like, they don't have to say what kind of felon or where you were. Like, it can be really bare bones. As long as you're on notice as the defendant of what you did, they're done. I would then, the one that I think people miss a lot in criminal cases is a detention motion. So the first thing you fight about in a criminal case is whether this person should be locked up pre-trial. And that's when the government comes in and says, Your Honor, you will not believe what a bad boy this is. Like, here is all the stuff we could ever think of that he has done in his life. And the defense will sometimes come back and say, you will not believe what an angel my client is. You know, his mother loves him. He has 17 puppies he's caring for at home. And, you know, so there'll be a decision on that at some point, but the factual presentation in there can be really interesting. And then, you know, if it's a completed criminal case, you want to see the judgment. You want to see, like, did he plead? Was there a plea agreement? What was he sentenced to, if anything? That kind of stuff gets really important because sometimes these cases begin with like a grand conspiracy and end up with a plea to something a lot less grand. Sometimes they admit the conspiracy as part of that. Sometimes they don't. You know, in a criminal case that goes to trial, there's going to be a ton of information. A lot of them go by plea. A lot of information will also be sealed. So when somebody gets sentenced, there's another truly interesting document called the Statement of Reasons that the court will file that says, here's why we're giving you this sentence. Almost always sealed. Plea agreements can be sealed. Sentencing documents in some districts are sealed. So just like the detention, there'll be every side will get to put in its memo before your sentencing. Here's why you're terrible, or here's why he's, you know, deserving of a second chance, whatever it may be. Some courts seal them just out of routine because it's very common to get a reduced sentence for cooperating, like with the federal government in other investigations, which is the sort of thing that might get you killed in prison. And like you, prisoners have PACER accounts on their cell phones. Yeah.
Immediate obvious question. Is there a PACER culture in prison? Do they actually, because I mean, like, people do oftentimes, like, in prison, like, talk about, like, oh, what are you in here for? And they behave accordingly.
Yeah, there had been a real thing where they would want to see, they would check out new inmates in some facilities, and they would look to see, you know, did you get what's called a 5K 1.1, which is a sentence reduction for cooperation. And sometimes they would just look to see, is the stuff around your sentencing sealed? And that might be enough to cause you problems. So I don't know that it's a culture, but there were enough people doing it that there started to be, this was maybe 10 years ago, a couple district courts would put on their website saying, the statement of reason is sealed in all cases. The fact that it's sealed does not mean anything, just to kind of diffuse the guessing game that came with, well, you know, this thing's sealed here, so this guy must be a snitch. I mean, the access to information there is pretty impressive.
Wow. Okay. And then another question.
We could have them come in and do this. I mean,
about the statement of reasons. So, is there like more benefit if it's say like a jury trial to like go to the trial itself, and then will the judge sometimes like explain things that doesn't make it into the document, or is that a way to get around it, or do they generally keep it quiet?
If you go to a sentencing, unless somebody moves to seal the sentencing, you will get more visibility than you will in the cold record, because in some places it's very common to just seal the sentencing documents as a matter of routine. It is not common to seal a courtroom. right? We have both a First Amendment and a common law right of access to criminal proceedings. So if the government wants to, and if the court is going to close a criminal proceeding, they have to go through the strict scrutiny test, right? Like there has to be a compelling government interest. There's no less restrictive alternative than sealing the courtroom. And some of the decisions on this are kind of far out. That, there was I think it was a Ninth Circuit case where the district court sealed a criminal proceeding, and the Ninth Circuit said you shouldn't have done that because you could have put the defendant in protective custody, which sucks. But protective custody would have been a less restrictive alternative than sealing the courtroom for whatever this proceeding was. So in a lot of places that is taken seriously.
Hi, sorry, I'm hiding back here.
That's okay.
I'm Jillian. I'm with McClatchy. So actually, when you brought up Devin Nunes, you reminded me I'm the Devin Nunes reporter for this paper.
Oh.
So I was wondering, I don't know if you follow these cases like this as well, but obviously there are documents every single week. And whenever I use one of these services, it really racks up charges for keeping track of everything. But it is important to know when a different document drops. Do you have like an organizational method for particular people or defendants you follow that is not?
Well, you have an interesting litigant in that he's in like the Virginia state courts, right? And is he in other state? Is he in California state courts too?
Not anymore.
Okay. So he's kind of all over the map. So you are left with whatever service happens to monitor Virginia state courts. And I should know this, but I don't. I think things like Westlaw, I think I'm required to plug Westlaw, there is a lot of visibility in some of those into trial courts, so you can set up alerts, but it's tough for them too to like get regular updates on the docket. So I think when you're trying to follow particular cases in lower court systems, you really are stuck with whatever tool. Some states, there'll be somebody who'll come up with a better way. The Pennsylvania has this unified judiciary with their dockets are like PDFs, and it's a horrible system, but somebody came up with like Docket in Your Pocket that was a mobile app that would let you track the same information. Great name. I think it was a lawyer who just was tired of dealing with that site. And so, yeah, I mean, when it comes to state courts and local courts, you're kind of stuck. And some of them are good and getting better. Like Virginia, at least you can go through the district courts mostly in one place and a lot of the circuit courts in one place, but not all of them. And you can't always get the documents. And yeah. And sometimes really what you have to do is cultivate a lawyer in the case and let them know how interested you are and see if they will just forward you whatever they might be getting. But there are also courts that like don't really do email or any kind of alerts, or I mean the state of the technology varies incredibly widely. There are courts in upstate New York that are still paper. It's amazing.
Sometimes it's kind of like highway robbery, how much they charge you for like a transcript. That's like one court. You work for
all transcripts are kind of highway robbery, right? So because it's how the court reporters make their living, especially if you're the first one and you want it fast, like you're going to pay hundreds of dollars to get your rush transcript of something. That's just kind of the nature of what it is, unless you're looking at an older thing. And so there's always a reason somebody asks for a transcript, right? If it already exists, it's usually because they want to appeal. If they appeal, then the entire transcript becomes part of the record on appeal that goes up to whatever the appellate court is. And then you go to the appellate court and say, y'all have the transcript, I'd like to see it, because it should be a public record at that point. But there's not a great or easy way. And state courts I've dropped a lot of money in state courts on things that make PACER seem like a real bargain. There was a state court in, I think, Orlando that said, we don't make change. So I think I paid $20 for a single piece of paper because that's all I had in my wallet. Yeah.
Hey, I just had another follow-up. You talked about kind of sealed courtrooms, and in your experience, have you found that media interveners have been relatively successful at gaining access to hearings? I mean, and I guess this is a particular example because the entire case is sealed, but, for instance, the contempt hearing before Judge Howell in the Trump documents case, we had a media intervener, and he didn't even make it into Howell's chambers, right? We didn't even make it to the courtroom. It was just so.
Right. I think it depends on what you're trying to do, but it is I also do a lot of FOIA work, and I'm a great FOIA skeptic because it takes years, and there is a process, there is a law, but it's not treated like there's a law. If you go to a court and say, I want access to this, I believe I am entitled to access to this, you might not always win, but they will almost always entertain what you have to say. And I've done that even without counsel. So there have been cases where I've just written to the federal judge and said, you have this sealed? I mean, I don't see on the record that you've done the First Amendment balancing, so here's why I think it should be open, and thanks for your time. And the judge held a hearing, and sadly both the government and the defendant agreed that it should still be sealed, so we did not do well. But we did actually pry some information out that way. And in a big enough case, you will see a lot of media organizations come together to hire very expensive lawyers who do a very good job at making the case for why this should be open. And you don't usually get the judge to say, oh, mea culpa, we should never have closed any of this, here's all of it. But what you will get is a more thoughtful decision about, can you have this, or can you have, what part of this could we potentially make public to you? They'll say, Justice Department, go back over this record and see what could be made public. Now, usually the way that litigation works is we come in and say, you can't keep this secret because everybody already knows it. So then at the end of the day, what you get is a record of the things you already know. But, it is better than nothing, and they do take that process pretty seriously. And, it is not at all unusual for the press to have success, especially for open courtrooms, more so than documents. Like, you cannot conduct this in secret. Now, if it's something like a grand jury proceeding where the rules of secrecy are just so well established, the right of access is limited. There's nobody who says, there's not much law to say we have a right of access to grand jury proceedings while they're happening. We're not going to do as well. But then again, the New York Times went in, I think, as an intervener to the FISA court, which has quite a culture of secrecy, and was able to make headway on getting documents that way. I mean, and that was an interesting example for me because we tried that litigating against the Justice Department, and they litigated through the FISA court, and the result of that, they may have had the better approach, but the upshot was documents became public of a type that had never been seen by anybody before.
Yeah, I mean, specifically with the kind of criminal contempt hearing, though, I mean, that wasn't documents, that wasn't grand jury material, that was, just a kind of, conference hearing, right? And that was,
Yeah, but the subject matter would be such that, I think that was a tough hill to climb. And I think there are good examples in the local courts here, in local courts all over. The first time I had to take a lawyer to court was like 6 high school kids had been charged with bullying or something, and the local court was trying to keep it secret, and we brought in a partner from some firm to argue for openness, and we won, but mostly what the partner seemed to do was like muscle up to the judge to keep the parents from punching me. But it works, and it works in a variety of places, but you're not going to get like the big success of the doors thrown open. You're going to get it by degrees.
More of an editorial question, and this might be a dumb question, but I've also run into this with tips where people, basically have their case dismissed and then keep appealing. And I've asked around outside of the court system and haven't made much headway. At what point are you like, okay, like maybe the judges, like maybe I take them at their word and there's not a story here, even though they keep appealing? Does that make sense?
Well, so they lose and then they appeal. Well, it depends, right? Because every court case, think of a civil case, right? Or a criminal case. There's 2 questions. There's, what did you do? And is it against the law? Right? And I'm usually much more interested in the first question than I am in the second. So if the judge says, you did take all that stuff, and and you did punch that guy, and all the other bad stuff, but they filed a year too late, statute of limitations, or they filed in the wrong court, or it turns out none of that stuff is against the law in New Jersey, right? Like we're just fine with that. I don't really care. I don't care about the legal conclusion for something like that as much as I care about the facts of what happened. Now, in a case that goes that way, you're not going to fully resolve the facts of what happened, because what the judge is going to say is, you accuse me of punching you. And the judge will say, even taking your accusation as totally true, that is not a thing you can sue about. I'm not deciding it's true, I'm assuming it's true. And I mean, this is actually, it's a really interesting question, because it's a pitfall when people try to report on legal issues without really understanding the process, right? If you go through a civil case, you're going to see orders early on from the judge saying well, so-and-so did this and this and this and this and this. The judge at that point hasn't made a finding about what the defendant did or didn't do. They're just required at that point to take everything you have said as the plaintiff as true. And, it is not at all unusual to see stories get written saying, well, the judge found this. I'm like, no, the judge didn't. And, it was a misapprehension of just how the process works. And some judges are better than others at being verbose about what they're doing in these things. So there are landmines like that around the system. But for the most part, as reporters, I mean, unless it's the court is reversing this policy or something, or sending somebody to prison, we don't care about was a specific tort committed or a specific law violated. We care who did what to whom and when. Okay, so let me turn to a sort of broader ambit of stuff, which is the broader brush kinds of background searches you guys can conduct, because I think people have in their heads PACER is this great national backgrounding tool for finding, whatever you want to know about your guy. And it's not. It's marginally helpful if he's been in federal court once, which will tell you a tiny little bit of him. Much more helpful if he's declared bankruptcy. Then, oh boy, do you learn about him. But these are just kind of a beginning point. So there are a lot of services out there that will help you identify where you might want to go looking for more information about particular people. Westlaw, again, required to plug, but has a very good national people finder. Accurate, TLO, LexisNexis has one that I'll actually show you guys in a minute because I think it's illustrative. And I mean, these can be great for any number of things. So sometimes you're writing about somebody, you just want to know about them, you want to know where they live or how old they are. The thing I often find myself really wanting to know about people is their cell phone number. And LexisNexis is really good at that. And I mean, one of the most fun conversations you can have is, how did you get this number? So there are some pitfalls to these, but I think the easiest way to show you is just to maybe try to demonstrate if we can. So this is LexisNexis. They have a public records section here that usually works. And my way in is this Smart Links Comprehensive Person Report. So I want to search for me. I want to search for someone in the news. Hunter Biden he's probably from Delaware, right? I only played with this once before. But off we go. You can filter in different, again, Joe Smith, maybe you want to know about how old he is. Maybe you want to be a little more precise about where he lives. But you can also look people up by their address. If something happened at a house, you can figure out all the people who lived in that house. So here he is with a list of addresses. If we click into his name, we will start to see quite a bit more information about him. So it's going to have aliases, which is just sort of the various ways you write your name. Usually it's nothing scandalous. We will have, let's see, criminal filings, traffic offense. Sometimes they pick up all your traffic offense. Like it's fascinating. Some places you can have a murder and have spent 20 years in prison and it will not know. Other places, you know, if you rolled a stop sign, it's going to have that. So one, you know, it will also tell you potential relatives of this person. I find this fascinating because, like, who would you expect to find? No Joe. Kind of weird, right? Oh. Well, I did because I'm looking for Joseph. But there was also no Joe. One of the things you'll see is, like, in searching, it's better to start with fragments of words than the whole word, because maybe, so I did that in PACER with Steve Bannon too, right? I did STE because I don't know if he's STEPHEN or STEV, what, you know, how is he going to be listed there? But STE will pick up both of them. So I do that when mucking around for text in a page too. So I show you this, I mean, there's a ton of information here, but I show you this as a way of illustrating that these things are both great and garbage. They're great in the sense that they take like millions and millions and millions of records from credit headers and courts and property deeds and all these things and like tie them together into one report on a particular person. They're garbage in the sense that they very often tie them to the wrong person, or they'll be missing important stuff. So they produce like a tip sheet. You couldn't take a single thing we just found in Nexus and publish it. You could take, but what you could do is see, oh, lives in Wilmington. That's in Newcastle County, I think. So I could go look for like the Newcastle County property records and get like the definitive reportable source on this. Or I could go look in the courts of Washington, D.C. and see, you know, what kind of information this is. So like nothing you find in these services should be treated as a reportable fact, but everything you find should be treated as a guide to where you can find that reportable fact. You know, and a lot of that is geographically based. Do you guys generally have access to tools like these? I mean, Westlaw, Nexus, something like that. Do you get in trouble if you just muck around with it? No? Go search for yourselves. Seriously, like take whatever service you have access to and go run a search for yourself, and you will be appalled at the amount of information that is either wrong or missing. You know, I did this for myself not too long ago, and you know, I've had the same cell phone number for like 15 years now. I put it everywhere I can think of, like it's on my Twitter bio, I put it on a web page, I put it all over. Still doesn't have it. Doesn't have, in fact, any of my current phone numbers. Has a bunch of phone numbers I don't recognize. Has addresses that I've never lived at. People I don't know, like associates that I don't know who they are. And I'm not just saying that because they're shady. So try it. But then, you know, what the very best thing if you want to learn about somebody, and this kind of goes to the state court stuff too, is these things are all a starting point. You know, if you go look up Steve Bannon and see that he lives in New York City, or Hunter Biden and see that he lives in Wilmington, and you want to know legal trouble, things like that, then now you know where to shop. You know what court to go into to actually run a proper name search that won't be hindered by Nexus scraping stuff. You know what police department to call, and you can start to go into any level of detail you want, right? Because now you kind of have an address, so you can go search the deed for that property and see who owns it. And you could go to the county 911 center and see how many 911 calls were dispatched to that property and for what type of stuff. And well, that's the end of my laptop. So I don't like this thing. But fortunately, that was also my last slide. So that, I think, is how you should treat these tools. And, you know, for things like state courts and, you know, I would treat Westlaw just like that, even though we do scrape state courts. We do, no? There's still just a lot that's missing, and you want the official report. You don't want according to a Westlaw scrape of this state court. You want according to the state court. The one cool thing about things like Nexus and Westlaw going and scraping all these state courts things is they will sometimes have stuff the courts got rid of. And they're not very good about getting rid of it when the courts do. So this comes up if somebody is charged with a crime and maybe acquitted and then goes and gets the record expunged. If you go to the court, it never happened. If you go to Nexus, that happened to pick it up before it got expunged, it's still there. So it'll be really challenging for you to go find any kind of information about that, but you'll know it and you'll have something you can ask them about. You know, it's a good lead you can pursue. So sometimes the information here is great. So does anybody have any questions here?
So I pitched the story saying, 7 out of however many cabinet members don't have DC addresses. And obviously I'm looking into it. And then after talking with the department, I think it was 5 of them within that 7 had addresses that just were not listed at all.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Especially if you're renting an apartment or it's weird where this information comes from. It'll come from credit reports, but do you change your voter registration? Maybe not. One thing that's really, so I searched for myself on Westlaw, which is a site basically built for lawyers. And all my information is in my state bar registration. They don't have it. It's just kind of missing. There's weird gaps. Yeah.
Yeah, I noticed in the LexisNexis kind of homepage, there was a bit for boats and FAA aircraft. So is that I know some reporters on Twitter track planes and flights to see who's running for vice president or what have you. Could you does that have a record of whose planes are whose and things like that? And could you use that to?
So sort of no, unless you're a really foolish owner of your private jet, right? If you have brought yourself a private jet and registered it in your own name, I think we could probably find it there, because I think that's just searching the FAA aircraft registration. But almost always if you have a private jet, you have registered it to your, Cayman Islands LLC or something like that. So you have to figure out what the name of that is, and it doesn't do the tracking, but those are just these giant databases that are publicly accessible. So we used to build these when I worked in local newsrooms, where we would gather all the state records, and we would have hunting licenses because you could get them, and we would have the voter registration. So it's that kind of easily accessible information, but you are very unlikely to find somebody's secret jet that way. I don't want to discourage you from trying.
Journalists, especially good ones, is that they want everyone to know the same information that they have, so that there's more people doing watchdog work. And Brad is such the epitome of that and very generous with his expertise. So thank you, Brad.
My pleasure.